Hello, welcome to my safe space. My name is Lena, and here I talk about my childhood traumas and how they affected me in my adult life. In today's deep dive, I want to talk about signs to look for in a child if you suspect they are a victim of CSA. Let me start by saying that I am not a trained professional who deals with children like this and knows what to look for. I am a CSA survivor myself, and my knowledge is based on my own experience. That's all. So please keep this in mind and take everything I say in this video as a personal anecdote as opposed to an educated advice. If you have grounds to suspect that someone is being a victim of CSA, please notify the authorities. The reason I'm making this video, though, is wanting to point out what signs I personally was showing that now seem obvious to me. I often question myself, how come no one noticed? How come no one knew? Why didn't anyone question my behavior? I know I was showing signs, and I want to tell you in this video what they were so that if you notice a child is doing something similar, maybe you need to pay closer attention to their environment and maybe even ask questions. I talk about questions to ask in my last video. But let's get back to what signs of CSA I was showing when I was actively abused by my dad. First and foremost, I knew about sex more than any other kid I knew. There was one girl who eventually surpassed me, and I have multiple reasons to believe she was abused by her stepdad. But all other kids knew nothing about sex, and I was the one who told them some things. I was careful not to tell them exactly how I knew those things, but if anyone asked, I would just say, oh, movies. But for example, when we played with dolls, I would be the one making our dolls do it in various ways. Of course, my friends were kids and didn't question anything. They just thought it was hilarious. But one time, a friend of mine told me that her mom forbid her to play with me anymore because she told her what our dolls were doing. I wonder how her mom explained it to herself, if she questioned this behavior in her head, or did she just think I was a weirdo? I don't know. But if a kid is making dolls do explicit things, then it's time to ask how they know these things. If someone taught them, or maybe they saw it on the internet. But just like I was saying in my last video, you have to be careful asking questions not to spook the child. They won't confess if something is going on if they sense they are in trouble, or oftentimes they won't say anything if an abuser is going to be in trouble. Some of the other things I did that should have been questions were unfortunately not discovered by adults. For example, I initiated making snow penises instead of snowman. I guess you could say we were making actual snowmen, except we attached snow penises to trees. It was hilarious at a time. While it might be still funny, it's not when you know the context that it was 10-year-olds making those, and one of them was sexually abused at home. But no one saw us doing this, so it was left unnoticed. Of course, I was the one drawing penises at school. I would be careful not to have them seen by teachers. A lot of kids did the same thing, but they were all boys. I guess it makes sense for them to draw something they knew very well. But for a girl to do that should be suspicious. I don't remember knowing any other girls that did the same thing. Since my dad needed something from me, I got smarter and started misbehaving, knowing that I can get away with it, or get away with a lot, because he had to be nice to me in order to continue molesting me. On some level, I guess I knew he was a prisoner of his own actions, and I also knew that he was afraid I would tell. Although he didn't tell me this, but eventually I realized that he was afraid of me telling on him. So I basically became myself instead of a kid who was previously yelled at for expressing my feelings and emotions. I became more extroverted because I'm definitely an extrovert, but my grandmother molded me to be an introvert for years, where I was very shy around adults and I would always be quiet. So, because I knew that my dad wanted me to do the things that he wanted me to do, he basically had to let me be myself. Over the years, I've changed. I became rebellious. I started arguing with adults, such as teachers. I lost interest in studying. And on top of that, my friend and I started endangering ourselves purposefully. She is the one that I strongly suspect was also a CSA victim. We would go to abandoned construction sites where homeless people and drug addicts hung out, and we would go on different floors of unfinished buildings and talk about jumping off while holding hands. The motive always was being misunderstood by the family, but we never actually discussed the details. It's almost as if we knew on some deep spiritual level that we shared similar experiences. Whether true or not, we bonded over this activity and talked about jumping off many times. The things we've seen at those construction sites are nightmare fuel. It was mostly previously tortured dead animals, drug paraphernalia, used condoms, photos of naked women. It was horrific. But we went there to seek thrill. I don't know why. We also spent a lot of time away from home while being 12, 13 years old. I mean, we were always out on the streets, did our own thing, and no one could say anything to us. Unless our families locked us inside, we wouldn't stop doing it. But our families didn't care and didn't worry about us enough to say something. I don't remember ever being told not to be on the streets. Thinking back, it's crazy to me how we were allowed to do that, because it was the 90s, the most dangerous times for the country in modern history, and it was a city with a lot of people. It wasn't the suburbs. Imagine Manhattan with all these people walking around, except buildings are no taller than 5 stories. That's where I grew up. But we scoured the streets like no big deal. I mentioned that I lost interest in studying. You wouldn't be able to tell by looking at my GPA or whatever, but I was just going through the motions and didn't express desire to be anything when I grew up. I didn't have an interest in any particular study. I didn't want to be in school, etc. And I wasn't bullied there, so that wasn't the reason at all. I just didn't see a future for myself, and my family made it clear I wasn't going to amount to anything, so why try? I can't say today if this was related to CSA at all, but I want to mention anything that was different about me at the time from what I was like before the abuse started. I was a teenager, so this could be all related to hormonal changes. I don't know, but I talked back a lot and lost all respect I had for teachers. I didn't care about their authority and what they had to say. We had our behavior evaluated once a week at the end of the school week. I always had an equivalent of an A for behavior, but now I started getting C's and even D's. At the time, my grandma wasn't even checking it, so naturally I didn't care to improve. There was no accountability like there was in the first few years of school. I also talked back at home and started treating my grandma with disrespect. Even my grandpa scolded me a couple of times for being mean to her. But I would basically question her authority, refuse to listen to her, and I would make fun of her, like her not having a high school diploma or her being old. Some extremely suspicious behaviors I exuded were mostly noticeable when I was around my dad. My grandma would even say that my dad and I were always cuddling and kissing. Yikes. She would tell me, leave him alone. He's your dad, not your boyfriend. I remember her saying things like that because I would hang on my dad a lot and I would spend a lot of time with him. All of this was in the beginning stages of CSA, when I was in denial and when I was groomed to believe it was what I wanted. My grandma would notice I was obsessed with my dad, but it never went beyond suspicions and snarky comments. Maybe those comments were a part of the reason I didn't tell my grandparents later on what my dad did to me, because those comments sounded Accusatory, as if I was the one initiating my abuse. It's as if I would be blamed for it if I told somebody. And there is a high statistical probability of this happening, as some of you may know and experienced it firsthand. But looking back, it must have been weird to see my dad and I together because our relationship at the time was strange. And I would be raising red flags if I were an adult and saw it. And maybe some people did see it, but chose to ignore it. It happens all the time, so I wouldn't be surprised if someone suspected CSA but said nothing. To sum it up, I was acting up and I spent time with my dad way more than I should have. I was also given expensive gifts by my dad out of the blue, which my grandma didn't appreciate and said he was spoiling me. I already talked about my family's Great Depression lifestyle when they actually had money saved up, but suddenly my dad spends money to buy me things no other kids had at the time. I mean, there were signs, clear signs. A CSA survivor would have probably noticed them, but were they noticeable to other people? I don't know. What do you think? Was I a weirdo or was I just a normal kid? And with this, I'm going to wrap this video up. Please don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any. I try to answer every comment that I see. If you wish, you can watch my other videos about CSA and healing from it on my channel. I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in a week. Bye.